Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Don Berchoff, CEO of TruWeather Solutions. Don has been Director at the National Weather Service of Science and Technology at NOAA, Vice President Advanced Weather Programs at Unisys, and Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Tempoquest. At TruWeather Solutions, Don is focused on aiding the flying vehicle industry in the entire ecosystem by providing micro weather decision insights. Welcome, Don.
Well, thanks for having me, Chuck.
So are you a weather nut? I mean, you've been doing weather for a long time.
Yeah, I'm a weather nerd. I actually the other day I was on another podcast and somebody called me out and said, "You have more than 40 years experience, Don. You have 53 years or 54 years experience." Because when I was a kid growing up in New York, at 7 years old, I got hooked on weather. And after that, I kept diaries and got my 10,000 Malcolm Gladwell hours by the time I went to college. So I'm a certified weather crazy man, but I also could say that this passion has really, helped me to really understand the problem sets and the solutions around this. I think, one thing you didn't mention is I was Air Force, so 24 years Air Force retired. So I got to practice a lot of weather integration into military operations and understand how do you get the most value out of weather for reaching an effect.
So let's talk about the flying vehicle industry and weather, because weather is obviously a serious component. Where does weather fit? And what you're doing for weather is really more detailed than like the weather forecast we see every day kind of thing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the weather forecast you see every day, whether it's on TV or it's through an app, that's really generic weather information. It comes from generic weather models. It's not really focused on precision micro weather as much as is required, say, for mission critical operations. So FAA and the weather industry writ large, and any country, and the ICAO and the World Meteorological Organization view weather as mission critical for aviation. Therefore, it has to have certain rules and regulations you follow, and that's the second level. The challenge is that weather system that was built going back to 1940 has not really transformed that much because it's really focused on manned or crewed aviation at major airports. And the challenge is now that we're moving into this realm of ubiquitous flight at low altitude, the current weather system wasn't built for that, the government weather systems. And unfortunately, there's not going to be the budget or the infrastructure to make investments in this. That's what I've been told by the FAA and Steve Bradford, the chief scientist. And so where we have to go now is we've got to take the current weather system, which isn't built for low altitude weather ubiquitously, and we've got to transform it to meet the requirements of this very weather sensitive, battery powered industry that is really flying in areas where we don't have weather measurements today. And therefore, we really can't know what's happening in certain areas.
A dumb question might be, is low weather different than high weather?
Absolutely. So when you fly, above, we call it the boundary layer, which is could be 3 to 5,000 feet above ground level. The air becomes more predictable. It's more laminar flow. It's more predictable in the big models. When you can see the jet streams a little bit clearer, you don't have to worry about localized effects as much. I'm not saying you don't get hit sometimes with a local impact. If you hit a wall of turbulence, that's a local impact. But generally speaking, we call that synoptic or global scale weather. When you get down below 5,000 feet, you get all the ground, the terrain, the heat, all the circulation of motion changes. And that's the area that we don't really have really good measurements on. And that's why today, if you're a GA pilot or a helicopter pilot, you get surprised a lot by weather that wasn't either forecasted or wasn't detectable. And we've gotten away with this for many years in the low altitude because big aircraft landed airports, which are well instrumented. You have wind shear systems, you have microburst systems. You don't have those at a heliport. You don't have those at a vertiport. And the helicopter and the GAs who go into locations without this better measurement systems know what I'm talking about. You'll get surprised. Now, it's okay because the pilot's on the aircraft, right? That's the last line of defense. The pilot is the best sensor we've ever had. And that's why we can fly in areas where there's uncertainty about the weather because they know they have to take action to mitigate the risk. Where we're going now is with unmanned aircraft, uncrewed aircraft. There's no way anymore for the pilot to be the last line of defense. And there's no measurements out there that can backfill what the pilot was experiencing and bring that knowledge. So we've got to, if we're going to move to digital flight, low altitude, microclimate, very small granular areas of weather that could be impactful that don't get picked up today in the global system or in the regional systems, we've got to change the system.
So how do you do that? What does it look like?
Well, we have to start looking at how we're going to take advanced weather sensing technologies, because today you have to use approved weather sources for weather for aviation, and that's basically the government aviation weather. There are companies out there like United and Delta and others who do have their own weather shops, their own weather people. They have them for a reason. They wouldn't be paying them if they didn't think they were needed. And that's because they need the more granularity to pay attention to their aviation and their business model to ensure they're not canceling flights that they don't need to cancel, or they're not getting people into positions where they're going to get trapped at an airport. And even today, the current aviation weather system isn't good enough at an automation scale for that. So you have to bring the human in, and that's why United and Delta hire these people. But mostly approved weather comes from government, and you can only use certain kinds of weather instruments. They have to be certified today, and they're usually ASOSs, automated weather observing systems, or AWOSs at airports, which are very expensive. They can run anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million a piece. And so what I saw 7 years ago was this isn't going to work for this industry, where you can't today, your choice at a vertiport or a heliport is a windsock or an ASOS. It just doesn't seem practical. Sensing technology has advanced so much since these rules came into place that we can move to a different way of approaching this. And the way we're going to approach it is through a data performance standard, not through certifying instruments, just like the rest of the industry is moving to a risk-based data performance standard. And so we're going to have a new standard that we just published with ASTM just published in January of 2024 that is going to outline a new data performance standard, which will allow the use of other weather sensors and IoT weather devices to crowdsource and capture weather in places today where we can't get it and support these operations, which will drive the cost down, increase the density of measurements, and make it safer and also more economically feasible for the drone.
So the electric vehicles, they're flying low and short distances, like it might be 30 miles, it might be 50 miles. How do you get that granular that this 50 mile, at 3,000 feet, we need to measure for the next 8 hours? How do you possibly do that?
Well, the good news is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit because the current system is so old that we use that there's actually a lot of room for improvement. I think what we have to change is the mindset of the operators. They will have to pay for this data if they want it because it's not going to be free. And I think that's the big challenge we have. Technologically, it's not a challenge. These instruments and capabilities that I'm going to be talking about have been out there for 10, 20 years. And that's why we've started TruWeather. It's unlocked the power of science and technology that has not gotten into operations for a lot of reasons. And so the bottom line is you can use wind scanning LiDARs, which we have 2 test beds now with NASA. We're going to have a third one in California. These wind scanning LiDARs are like radars that do ranges up to 20 or 10 or 15 kilometers, and they could see dirt and dust using lasers. And we can back the wind speeds out using Doppler technology, and we could see an area of wind that today you can't see. Today we have no measurements between airports. Only 5% of the country has a real weather measurement at the surface or above the surface. Everywhere else, it's a gap. So what we do is we take the current weather data we do have, which could be airplanes landing at an airport. Remember, this is low altitude now. I'm not talking about high altitude. So they come in, we get some wind measurements, but it's only around the aerodrome. You get your ceiling height measurement there, you get your visibility, and then we extrapolate that and interpret it in models in areas where we don't have measurements, and the models can't handle it because they don't have the terrain or the local effects in the physics. So what we have to do is fill those gaps. There's instruments out there we could do it. We also could collect weather data off of drones and off of eVTOLs. But we have to get through the technological hurdle of fusing all this together and making it into a simple. And that's what TruWeather does. We're building it to a simple fusion engine that could get this data out and help manage power management better, weight carried, distance traveled, based on real weather data, not on a model that could be off 10 or 30%.
So I know you deal with the flying industry and the air taxi business a lot. When you tell them about this, what do they say? I don't need this, or I need this desperately, or when can you do it? What's the reaction?
It's all over the board and it's based on where they sit. So if you talk to the CFOs or the CEOs or COOs of companies, they're frustrated at the amount of low altitude operations that are canceled, delayed due to weather or perceived weather. 30% of manned aviation or crewed aviation today that cancels or delays due to weather could have flown. You hear it all the time. Hey, I could have flown today. The damn weather guy screwed up. Well, if
But
that's
there are no repercussions also.
well, there's no repercussions, right? And part of it is it's God's will, right? Or it's it's something that we can always say it's uncertainty that we don't have data to measure. So how do we do something well that we don't have data, right? So the bottom line is that we've always had this problem, but we've absorbed it in our crewed aviation. It's priced into your airline tickets, it's priced into your package, it's priced into whatever, right? Now the new industry can't afford that. They can't have extra costs. They can't pass on costs to consumers. And so when they start seeing pilots canceling weather or canceling missions based on uncertain weather and it's a good day, they go, wait a minute, I need to fly. I can't sit on this. So the CFOs and those guys get it. And they're my best friends because I'm going to hopefully bring them something. But they also understand they're going to have to pay for it. And what I've told them is there's a 4-to-1 return on investment that we're trying to get because we're going to have to put infrastructure out. We're going to have to sell this data as a service. We're going to have to set this all up. Our goal is to amortize this cost across lots of different drone companies so nobody gets hit with the bill. But it's going to be a different change. It's a public-private partnership kind of an approach, and it's going to be a service that they're going to have to pay for. Now, when you talk to the drone pilots, they say, I don't need this because most of them have been pilots. I got 4,000 hours flying. And I go, yeah, but the problem is you're not going to be in the aircraft anymore. And if you're flying remotely from 1,000 miles away, a drone, you're not even waking up in the same environment that you're flying in. You have unknowable information about that weather. You've gotten used to dealing with what you have, but it's not going to get you to the economics that you guys need. And it's not going to get you the risk and the certainty level high enough and the risk level low enough to make this an economically scalable industry. You can't afford to sit on the ground.
So for a company that's doing drones, let's talk drones for a bit. If they've got drones that are beyond line of sight and they're just delivering, say, a hamburger, I mean that, as you know, that's the kind of stuff that's going on everywhere, or life-saving medicine. It's all over the gamut. How do they deal with that? Because that could be a longer range, or a range that maybe you're not familiar with. That like it's a one-time trip.
Look, it's all about the business model and the business case, right? And if you're flying a regularly scheduled drone delivery operation in an area, even if it's let's just say a 10 or 15 mile radius from some central location, you're going to lose 30 to 40% of your flights during when weather cancellation occurs that you could have flown. It's like I've been in this business. I did over 1 million flight weather briefings. My people under me did over 1 million flight weather briefings. It's just what it is, right? And so I've had companies in the last week who do drone delivery calling me up and saying, we tried to solve this problem on our own. We put out our own weather sensors. The problem is everybody thinks weather is easy, but the thing is it's really a complex science that you got to understand. Every problem set's different. The sensors you deploy, where you deploy them, how that's going to help feedback in your system and get you the intelligence you need. You don't have to spend a lot of money on this if you understand, if you have a strategy and you have a plan. And that's what we do. We have a strategy and a plan. We can help these companies reduce the loss of flight time by strategically placing cost-effective sensors and bringing that data all together into a decision product that you can automate or at least have a process around it so that individuals who think they know weather are not messing up your process and canceling when you could fly, right? It has to get down into more of a systematic approach than we've had in the past.
So because weather is so, I don't say unpredictable, but I mean, it's not a pure thing. If you start to increase flights saying, okay, you don't have to cancel this and something happens, is there liability to that?
Well, there's never the liability for weather. There's no real liability because there's still uncertainty always in weather. I mean, until you have perfect measurements everywhere and you have models that are perfect physics and
Isn't that never?
you have compute it. Well, I guess I've answered your question, right? I mean, what we do is we provide a service, and over time, you're still going to have to do your risk management and your checks. But the goal is we're going to take the bar from where it is now, which is a very unknown, uncertain situation, and we're going to get you enough data to get you to another level. If you're going to take risk beyond that, I can't help you. But if we get the sensors out there, you're going to have known information that today you don't have. And that's going to, just from that alone, just having the real data will tell you, can I fly or not right now based on that data? Today, they're sitting on the ground because they're using a METAR 20 miles away, and it's not relevant. But yet they can't fly because that's the only data they have. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the system, Chuck, where we can really lift the game up, get some money back in their pocket without taking it so far that we're pushing the risk beyond reasonable.
Well, isn't it also an opportunity that these are short flights relatively? So it's not like you have to predict the weather from, New York to Kansas. It's really from, it might be a regional airport to something 20 miles away.
Well, that helps. So like, there's three use cases we're focused on, right? First one is small drone operations with delivery and pipeline inspection and any kind of agriculture and those could go out pretty far. I mean, they could go 60, 70 miles in some of those cases if they're doing a pipeline inspection. So we got to be cognizant of that. But the bottom line is it's a short range, like a 0 to 6 hours that we really got to focus on. 0 to 6 hours is what we want to get right. Some drone operators don't need 6 hours. Some of them only need an hour. Some of them need 2, because if they're going to cancel deliveries, it's going to take them an hour to get pumped up again to get orders in the system, right? You got to get the whole system moving again. It's not just the delivery of the drone, it's getting the goods off the shelf. If you're going to shut down your app and you got to predict when it's going to come back on again, then you've got some time for that. So you have to do that more than 10 minutes in advance.
So the way this weather would work, say it's 2 hours versus 6 hours, do you basically just do the weather for that period of time?
That's what we could do it for beyond that, but where we're putting our resources and our effort is in the 0 to 6 hours, 0 to 5 hours, because that's where we know the maximum bang for the buck is for the operator. They're losing most of their money in that short range. Yes, they could, have a long range forecast that can maybe help them decide not to send a team out 100 miles for tomorrow and stay home. But really the money that's being lost day to day is, believe me, it's around these logistics decisions, and it adds up. It's like a million paper cuts, right? That add up to bleeding.
So for flying taxis, is there an advantage to that, since those will be relatively fixed points, at least to start from A to B, A to B, A to B, back and forth?
Absolutely. So my strategy is right now is we're going to have strategic infrastructure that we can deploy in areas where there's fixed corridors and high density operations, or what I call high cost operations, or high revenue producing operations. Potentially, you put the best weather capabilities in those areas. So like these wind lidars, and that's what we're going to test in Dallas. We're going to have 3 scanning wind lidars. We're going to have ground-based infrastructure to see cloud and maybe see other things that today you can't see in these areas. And then we're doing the same in California with NASA. These are both NASA funded. The one in Dallas will be focused on low-level drone operations. The one in California around Hollister will be focused on middle-mile cargo drone, regional airport to regional airport, and air taxis. And the whole idea is to optimize their battery power for these air taxis, making sure that they can put as much weight on them that's safe, that they can know how much recharge time they're going to have, to know what's the best route to go to try sweet airspace, to understand what the angle of approach has to be. These air taxis their angle of approach is going to be based on wind, right? And every time they miss that, they are going to use more energy to land. That's what I learned. I'm not an engineer. I talk to my customers and they tell me, Don, this is why we need these highly precise winds. We can't live with the winds we have. And when you have urban areas where the winds are blowing through urban canyons, we don't even have measurements of that today. Nobody knows what that wind is. You could put a weather system on the vertiport, but that's not going to give you the winds on approach. It's not going to give you the winds along the route. Wind is money, just like the renewable energy industry. If you talk to the solar farms or the wind farms, they will tell you weather is the biggest driver of cost to them, because they have to make promises about contracts. They're going to deliver a certain amount of energy. And when those wind forecasts are off by a half a knot or 1 knot, just 1 knot, it could be $1 million out of their pocket.
Wow.
What I'm telling you is that the drone industry, the air taxi industry is going to have the same problem. The 1 knot, 2 knots, 3 knots of wind off is going to, I'm not saying $1 million, but it's going to resonate into some cost out of their pocket if we don't have the precision. And my argument is we're doing everything precise with this air traffic management for eVTOLs and drones. We're going to have detect and avoid. We're going to know comm going from cellular to Wi-Fi, back to satellite, back to cellular. We're going to know everything about this. And we're going to use 1980s weather. Doesn't make sense.
Air taxis are a global phenomenon. Are you finding things in different parts of the world? You got stuff going in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, I mean, all over the place. Is it different or is it the same everywhere?
I always say weather is like politics. It's all local, right? But so every location has its own challenges. When I think of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking of dust storms. I'm thinking of dry thunderstorm outbursts that you don't see any rain, but they could go across the desert and bring those winds into these urban canyons. And how are we going to know that's happening? I think about heat. I think about density altitude. And what lift is going to be impacted. I think about winds in the urban canyons of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and I think about fog coming off of the Persian Gulf. When I think of someplace else like Europe, and I think about Finland, I think about icing, I think about snow, I think about more wind. So every place is different.
So can your technology handle all of that?
You have to build a solution for that environment. Yes, we could do that. But you have to pay for it. And so here's,
yeah, it's a business.
I keep bringing this up because people, again, they don't understand that this is not going to be free out of the government, right? Nobody can afford to put this all out. And the science we're talking about is not something governments will easily be able to develop because they're focused on other things. This is why we have TruWeather. Now, if you think about these locations, we are prepared for every one of them because we understand the climate. I remember I was Air Force, so I've been stationed in Afghanistan. I was stationed in Kyrgyzstan. I was in South Korea. We understand, my company understands all these climates very well. And the standard that we're working on can be applied to any civil aviation authority or in any country. And we can help them manage how do we bring this new standard in, and then how we move to this new technology for advanced technology, and how do we keep these costs under control using this technology, and then how do we make that into a system that's going to make economic sense for their industry. This will drive economic growth in the industry because I can guarantee you 30% of the time, I call it the weather tax. There's a weather tax. The weather tax is the price Mother Nature imposes upon your business, both real or perceived. And your weather tax will be 30% unless you can get better infrastructure out there. And I could save you 30% of the weather tax if we have the right measurements and the right data.
Like any other industry, your approach is obviously new. Are there legacy weather people who say we don't need this new stuff? We're good with this thing we've had from the 1930s or whatever?
No. Most scientists and meteorologists and aviation meteorologists understand that we only, it's like Rumsfeld once said, you go to war with the system you have, not the system you wish you had. We always want better. We know that this is an under-resourced and we're underperforming in weather, in aviation, based on the technology that's available. We're frustrated. This is not the National Weather Service's Aviation Weather Center. That's not what they've done wrong. It's not what anybody's done wrong. It's the system. And there's only so much money in it. And so, no, I think there is no weather person you'll ever talk to tell you that the system is fine because they sweat every day trying to figure out how to keep people from getting in trouble. And we always want more data. And I'm going to tell you, I have some really good stories about what I did as a lieutenant or a captain to get weather data. I was at South Korea. I was at Kunsan. I had to worry about sea fog. It was 1991. Couldn't see the sea fog when there was high clouds. The sea fog would come in the afternoon, and our aircraft would get trapped somewhere, have to divert. I would get my butt kicked. I figured out that I can call an island that had a Korean professional whose family lived out there to say, is there fog out there every day? And when they said there was fog, we knew that we had to bring the fog in. So that's how much we, as weather people, what we go through sometimes to try to figure out how to keep people safe and how to keep things moving.
So where is this going to go? Is this going to be a slow roll, or is this going to be pretty quick because the industry just wakes up and says, gee, we need to be more efficient?
Well, no, it's a slow roll. I think, but the good news is that, we are still here. I started this in 2015, but I realized the drone and air taxi business was going to be the best business case for microweather we've ever had, which was going to drive the need for better infrastructure, which we couldn't justify before, even though other verticals needed it, like agriculture, renewable energy, but they just weren't able to pull together the business case that somebody would fund, including the government. I saw this coming. This is taking a little longer, obviously, because of the regulatory policies and all the things. But, we've made it this far. It's going to be a slow burn in terms of convincing people that they have to invest in this now as a service, but the thing I remind them is free's been costing you 30% grounding. And it does cost money. Weather costs you money if you don't have good data. You just don't realize it because you kind of baked it in your mindset. But I will tell you, the OEMs, some of them are seeing it. I can't talk about specifics. They get it. Some of them getting it now. Drone delivery companies, I know two that are really getting it. And so it's coming, right? And I think when Part 108 comes out here in the United States, which is the BV loss rule, and they're also going to come out with a new Part 146, which is for service suppliers. It's going to demonstrate that there's a method now and a means to quantify and validate third-party weather providers, because you can't just have any weather company come in and do this. You have to have a chain of custody. You have to have reliability. You got to prove yourself. The aviation system is not going to allow third-party providers in unless they know that they have a chain of custody and they've been kind of approved for this. And
So
so
we've talked drones, we've talked flying taxis. As you know, they're going to be certified flying vehicles where one or two people have them in the garage, they pull out. Is there going to be a use for what you're doing there as well? Or are
absolutely.
they going to be more general?
No, I mean, look, if you want to fly it and go someplace out of your garage, I would advise you, if you're going to invest in a flying taxi, you should have a weather instrument on site that could get you at least the cloud height and visibility, and you can measure wind. We could get you the winds at least 200 to 300 feet above ground level, because right now it's uncertain. And then you can tap into the service from there and take advantage of the other infrastructure, hopefully that others are investing in, and that will help to make your journey less bumpy, a little less, a little safer, more reliable.
So if we're talking about this a year from now, what would we be talking about?
A year from now, we will have two major test beds up. We will be working with some OEMs that are going into cities to start flying, about how we get this infrastructure in place for them as a service and get that set up. We'll be talking about several drone delivery companies that have invested in sensors that they will deploy and that we will be able to bring into our system and crowdsource with everything else for them to pay as a service.
Well, I look forward to that conversation. Thank you so much, Don, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things. I'm Chuck Martin.
Thank you, Chuck.